Yes, Dr. Anani, welcome. And we want to discuss with you the presence of the emergence of actors like ISIS in the region, and also how do they affecting the political structure, political system in the Middle East, because in the last couple of years there is much debate on these issues, but on the other hand, we see different groups claiming allegiance to ISIS in different parts of the region. We all know much about the presence of ISIS in Iraq and also in Syria, but there is also some limited information in some parts of the region about the presence of ISIS, their presence and their activities in North Africa. And could you tell us about the presence of ISIS in Sinai, in North Africa, in Libya, and how do they emerge? How they get the support from the local people? What are their, let's say, tools to have much increasing support from the local people?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the key reasons behind the emergence of ISIS is their ability to capitalize on the grievances of many people around the Middle East. And you know that this region has a lot of problems, particularly economic, social, and political problems that would allow extreme parties and movements like ISIS to thrive and to emerge and to recruit many people. And it has become a brand more than anything else. Those people who would like to take revenge from their regimes or try to resist repression, they would use some sort of violent tools in order to counter this kind of repression. However, one of the key tools of ISIS to recruit people is trying to localize its ideology, trying to exploit the internal problems like, as I said, social and economic grievances. If you look at Egypt, for instance, you would ask the question why ISIS is thriving in Sinai, not at any other parts of Egypt, because Sinai has been marginalized, has been deprived from economic and social development over the last 3 decades. The treatment of the government to Sinai people was really bad, given the fact that the government did not put any kind of plan in order to modernize, in order to build infrastructure that can help the integration of the Bedouin and of Sinai people. That's why ISIS would step in and try to exploit these kind of grievances against the central government in Cairo in order to recruit many people. Also, the only approach that the government is using towards Sinai is security approach. So they don't give much attention to the political, to the economic and the social approach. And this started before the uprising of Egypt in 2011. This has been the case under Mubarak regime, particularly the last decade of Mubarak, when they applied a very heavy-handed policy against Sinai people in order to repress them. So all these circumstances would create a very fertile ground for groups like ISIS to grow and to recruit people. Also, you'd find similar situation in other countries like Libya, for instance. Libya, after the removal of Gaddafi from power, has become less stable. There is no control for any faction. The country doesn't have a strong central government that can take control over the entire territory of Libya. But at the same time also you would find some, I would say, tribal, some social economic grievances that groups like ISIS would try to exploit, would try to recruit people based on their grievances.
You referred to the policies applied by governments in Sinai, for example, and only resorting to the military means. In your assessment, is it by purpose that the governments are only using these type of military tools, or do they only evaluate the developments from a security perspective? They may understand the also social causes of the conflict, but they don't pay attention. They may also use this threat to legitimize their own policies. How do they behave? Is it because they only look from the security perspective, or they know the root cause of the conflict but still use the same policy?
Well, Masoud, we are talking about very authoritarian regimes. They would not pay much attention to people's needs at the first place. So it's some sort of vicious circle that the government will not pay attention then people would react to this, and then the government would react in a very repressive and very suppressive way. So you will continue in such cycle without any ability to break this cycle out and to treat the real causes of this problem. As I said, if you look at Egypt, for instance, the government has a very short-sighted policy when it comes to regions like Sinai, for instance. And I'll give you just an example for this. If you are a Sinai resident, you would not be able to move easily to other parts of the country without crossing many checkpoints that would absolutely humiliate your dignity. And this would create more absolutely more of bad reaction from the local people. So it is يعني part of the way that the government treats the people, and the people that the way that people react to this kind of treatment. So if we're talking about policy recommendations in this regard, I would say the first thing to do is that to listen to the local people, to sit with them, to take them seriously, and to try to treat them in a different way. So they tried the security approach and it failed. It failed miserably. If you look at the situation right now in Sinai, there is no control almost for the government there. Groups like ISIS would have the ability to expand their dominance there and try to recruit many people. So if the security approach failed, why not you try another approach that would diminish these kind of consequences and try to improve the situation? But again, as I said, these governments think that no one can hold them accountable. So why they should bother by putting money and putting policies in order to improve the situation there? On the other hand, some of these governments will try to use the terrorist threat in order to blackmail the West, to get support. And we have a very significant example here, the case of Yemen under Ali Abdullah Saleh. Ali Abdullah Saleh at some point was using Al-Qaeda in the past, when he was in power. He used Al-Qaeda as a tool to blackmail the West in two different ways, to get a lot of financial aid from them, at the same time to keep him in power. So as a source of legitimacy. And this is really something really ethically unacceptable, because you jeopardize people's safety in order to remain in power. So you don't care about people's safety, or you don't care about security in the country, but you care more by how to remain in power, even if this would come at the expense of the country. So this is the situation that we have in the Middle East.
When you refer to the case of Ali Abdullah Saleh, it reminded me of Haftar, the case in Libya. And then you also talked about how to break this cycle, this vicious cycle, which always legitimize these types of policies in the region. And then in your assessment, you also referred to the West. In your analysis, is any kind of awareness among the Western actors about the use of this ISIS or any other type of threat to legitimize the local rulers there? Is there any awareness among the Western decision makers in that regard? If they are aware, why they don't change their stance toward these rulers?
Well, this is politics. I would say absolutely they are aware of what's happening there, and they know very well the sources of this kind of extremism. But the thing is that they try to choose between two evils. So either to maintain the support for the authoritarian and for the repressive regimes, or they think that the alternative would be groups like ISIS or like Al-Qaeda, which is something absolutely unreasonable. Why? Because there are different choices. So the fate of the Middle East people is not only between these two
Bad options.
Bad option. It's not between these two kind of bad choices, that either you have authoritarian regimes or you would have extreme ideologies. No, people of the Middle East, they deserve absolutely much better future, and they are willing. And we saw this in 2011 when hundreds of thousands of young people came to the streets, and they spoke up and they asked for freedom, for democracy, for dignity. But unfortunately, the West did not pay much attention to this. The West went back to the old game. Who is the party that we can do business with? And they found that the only party is mainly the authoritarian regimes. Also, we should not forget that we have a major issue, which is Israel. And I don't think that Israel welcomed the Arab Spring. Israel was always feeling threatened by the Arab Spring. And they would prefer to deal with authoritarian regimes like the one in Egypt than dealing with elected and democratic governments.
In the case of Sinai, you referred to, I was about to ask, Israel. How influential is the position of Israel or the presence of Israel in the case of Sinai? Because you said there are lots of control on the side of the government in Sinai, but on the other hand, Sinai is very crucial for Israel's security as well. So what is the position of Israel here, and how the Egyptian government is responding to this challenge?
Well, I think one of the key objectives of the current government in Egypt, ironically, is not the security of people in Sinai. It's merely the security of Israel. And this is part of some sort of unwritten pact between the two countries, the two regimes, the regime in Tel Aviv, the regime in Egypt. And this kind of bargain based on that Tel Aviv will provide as much support as it can, particularly by asking or by pushing the West to recognize and to legitimize the regime in Egypt in exchange of getting some security and some support from the Egyptian regime. Now, for the first time in Egypt, modern history would find that Israel can carry out some attacks in Sinai under the excuse of going after terrorists. So this is absolutely a violation of Egyptian sovereignty, but no one would speak about this at the moment. So there is some sort of mutual interest between the regime in Cairo and between Israel. So I don't think that the regime would take any action that would affect this kind of relationship. In fact, the regime is doing totally the opposite. How to appease Israel, how to satisfy Israel, how to maintain the security of Israel, even if this will come at the expense of the security of people in Sinai.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anani, for
you.
your comments.
Thanks.